Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Reinsurance Podcast. I'm your co-host, Jared Lee.
And I'm Ben Rose.
As always, good to see you.
And you too, sir. And
Today-
I noticed we're matching.
I mean, yeah.
This wasn't very well planned. When you got up this morning, were you just like, I reckon Ben's going to wear his Supercede t-shirt.
It felt like today's the day to wear Supercede shirts. But fortuitously enough, today is our first Ask Us Anything AUA.
What's it normally? AMA.
AMA.
Ask me anything.
But there's two of us. So I feel
Ask
we're
us.
not just asking one of us. It's a joint effort.
If only it was AUM. Assets under management.
Well, we'll see how that goes. Maybe we'll get there.
Question 1. Do you have any assets under management that you want to disclose to the listeners of the Reinsurance Podcast?
Yeah, exactly. Give us investment advice. We've already been told we can't give you investment advice on this podcast.
We can't give you any advice. Don't listen to anything we say.
We're slowly molding the young minds of reinsurance on the Reinsurance Podcast.
So what is the plan?
I've got my laptop here. We've got some questions coming through.
Are they coming? So you haven't seen these questions before?
I've not seen these.
And they haven't even arrived yet,
No.
that's my understanding. So it's at the moment you've got a blank page.
Yeah, I have a blank page with one question pre-populated.
Okay.
And the others will progress as we successfully. I feel like levels, right? You have to successfully complete the question before you get another one passed to you. It's like those rings you have to pass before you can.
Are we doing one each or mix and match? Or
Let's
both?
just-
We'll see how we go.
Yeah.
All right.
In true
I
reinsurance
can roll with
podcast
this.
fashion, we're gonna have no rules. So first question: why did you decide to build your own thing, i.e., Supercede, rather than go work for Guy Carpenter or stay at Aon and develop their existing solutions? Those being AB Connect and GC Marketplace.
That's a good question. I think for us, you could put emphasis on so many different words on that question, because you could say, why did you build? But I think it was less about us, really. In some ways, it was more about this crisis moment of the industry where, AB Connect and GC Marketplace were great for Aon and Guy Carpenter, but they weren't the only brokers in the space.
Yep.
What were all the other brokers going to do? And I think all the brokers were sat there going, do we now have to spend millions on building our own systems as well?
Yep.
And all the reinsurers, meanwhile, were going, oh dear, if we have to log into 10 different systems, every renewal season and be like constantly jumping back and forwards between them, that's going to kill us.
Yeah.
And so initially, I think that was one of the main things for us. It was trying to figure out how this was going to get solved.
Yeah.
It so happened that afterwards we realized that we might actually be able to be the ones to start something after a heck of a lot of research and trying to figure it out.
Yeah. I think the other thing that we recognized really early on was that to that point, one, the worst case scenario is 20 solutions that every underwriter has to sort of have access to, and that all work differently, et cetera. And that the industry wouldn't use Aon's tool and the industry wouldn't use Guy Carpenter's tool. Those underwriters are happy to sort of log on and follow what those big firms want them to do, but you're not going to see Willis going, oh, Aon, can we use your placement platform? Or, Guy Carpenter, can we, you were never going to see that. So there was always this need for something to happen that would be independent. And then I think having both of us worked at the big firms, a little bit of kind of setting out and having the autonomy, and so going, well, if we think we should do it this way, I don't need to sort of convince someone else that that's the way we should do it. We just have to convince each other that that's a good way to do it. And I think that there's an appeal to that. Maybe following on from our M&A conversation, the same reason people might go, I'm going to leave that underwriting firm because I had a different thesis than those people did. We can test that out a bit more with a bit more freedom.
Yeah, and I think it underlines a lot of the reason we insist so heavily on independence as well, right? Because not only for the reinsurers would it have been a pain to have to log into 20 different systems, but as we started working more and more with cedents as well and really trying to help all parties in the reinsurance deal-making process, whether you're buying, broking, or underwriting, as a cedent, you don't want to have to go into a different system to track each deal you're doing, but you do want to be able to work with lots of different broker partners. And likewise, so it just makes sense to have an independent system that everybody can use freely as much or as they want to, really.
Yeah, and I think when you're sitting between those parties, it provides a really interesting and valuable lens. Anytime a single firm builds something, like they're always client number one. They're doing it for other, partners or similar, and they want those partners to have a good experience, of course. But at the end of the day, it has to benefit them a little bit more, because that's why they're investing so much in it. Where we sit quite nicely now between those things, going, oh, we're doing this for these people and those for those people. Like that's all okay, because we're just trying to service the group.
We want everybody to have a nice party.
Everyone,
not just the birthday boy.
But he gets the most cake. This one's for you, Ben.
Ooh.
Gary from Chicago asks,
really?
Do you get that reference?
I don't.
Oh,
it sounds like an American reference.
It is an American. It was a Facebook earnings call meme that went around this week.
I missed that.
But
we don't talk to Facebook.
Exactly. What is the most outrageous risk that ever landed on your desk during your time as an underwriter?
That's an interesting question. So actually getting it to land on the desk was, it wouldn't make it on the desk if it was too outrageous. Because the really outrageous ones were more like people wandering around, kind of a bit lost, and being like, "Do you guys do this?" There was something.
Do all the underwriters sort of do one of these like eye shielding kind of this?
Like genuinely, they do.
Just roaming aimlessly, quick divert your case.
Yeah, no, I remember there was one broker who came over, and our liability team were out for some reason. I can't remember, they were at a conference or something, or a lunch or whatever. But they came around and they're like, "Does your liability team do adult toys?" And I was like, I don't know. I do hurricanes. Like, maybe, but look, somebody does, presumably, right?
My claim of the week.
Well, that's a massive. Presumably, that's a massive liability risk, right? There's quite a sensitive. I didn't know if we did it, but there's people going around the market
in the NSFW space.
Yeah, it's a genuine risk. That, people's bodies are real.
Yeah.
So that was probably one of the more surprising ones.
Yeah.
One of the other things I found from the stuff that actually did land on our desk quite surprising was how many like nicknames go around the market for different clients. Like usually, like if you can turn any client's name into something vaguely like primary school age funny by changing like 2 of the letters. That happened for like 1 out of 3 accounts. So students out there, your brokers and reinsurers are probably referring to you by a slightly amusing alternative version of your name. Yeah. So watch out for
your favorite broker.
Not your favorite one.
The other ones. What is it like running a reinsure tech startup?
Oh, you better take this one.
Oof. It's a roller coaster at times. I think when we've set out, we've gone through these sort of really exciting highs, and then you have things that things are harder than you expect. And for both of us, it's our first company, and so there's a huge learning curve at times where you've never experienced how to do certain things, and you can only learn so much from books or mentors or things like that. I think we're at a point now where we've sort of escaped a lot of the early chaos. When we were going around in the earliest days raising our very first bits of money, very, very stressful. Getting your first few employees, very, very stressful. And I think for me anyway, doing that part right with the early employees was really important, but really hard. You were really concerned about making mistakes there and recognizing that people were quitting other jobs to join you, and if you made mistakes on all manner of little things that would so I always put a huge amount of weight on getting that right. But it's been a really, really fun ride so far. We're not nearly done, but it's been good.
Yeah, I'd agree. Steepest possible learning curve, I would say, which is what we both wanted. I think when we before we quit, we started learning about the space, became mentors at startup bootcamp in SureTech, and started going to interesting tech meetups and things to learn how much we didn't know. And that whole process of education, I think, was amazing, because as somebody running a tech startup, you're not just thinking about customers, you're not just thinking about your internal people, you're also thinking about investors, you're also thinking about your general stakeholders more generally, which could be anything from, HMRC in the UK, your sort of tax organisations, your lawyers, your investor community, all sorts of different characters that in a normal job as an employee you probably don't have to worry about.
Yep.
Like the amount of time we've spent learning about strange accounting requirements and things and legal and HR and health and safety and employment law, all sorts of stuff that otherwise you wouldn't get to have much exposure to in quite a traditional big firm role.
Yep.
It's been really enlightening and a sort of roll your sleeves up learning approach.
Yeah, I think there's certainly like a vertical learning curve, right?
Like a slide, like a death slide, but upwards.
Yeah. I remember reading something a long time ago was that the more sort of voracious you are as a learner, like the better chance you have at this, because there's an adage about like in the early days, like it's the founders who are like putting the furniture together. No, IKEA furniture is pretty basic. You order it, you follow the instructions with the pictures, and you're good to go. But it's like how does this tax incentive work for early investors when there's two different schemes in the UK, and what does that mean for investors who aren't there? Like, well, better learn about that. Like, so it's not only just what does the client want, build a good product. I think those are the things that you perceive as like, how do you get a good product? How do you get it to market? How do you price it or think about those kinds of things? But it's like all of the stuff that you don't see that like, that's like when you talk about founders working quite long hours or late, it's like, it's not the stuff that you think about. It's more of the, okay, so I'm reading up on like UK tax law for option schemes, and this is what I'm learning. It's like it's all of that stuff that I think is an interesting thing. It's a difficult thing at times as well because it taxes your mental resource on it. But it's been a really fun journey. As we grow and as we get bigger, we can begin to offload some of those tasks. You hire people who can do that thing better because you learned enough to get you to where you are now, but now it's time to sort of bring on someone who actually knows how to do this for a job. and that's a nice transition to get to. And as you scale, you have different problems and different challenges you face. But it's been immensely rewarding. And we've talked about before, both of us are huge supporters of people starting companies and of entrepreneurs. So we would encourage people to do it, but do so with eyes wide open. It's definitely not for the faint of heart.
Indeed. New question arrived.
Gary from Chicago. I accidentally shrunk my jumper to an extra small. Can I donate it to Ben so he can wear it on the podcast?
Yes. No.
I would.
I was going to say,
if people send us gifts, I will wear a gift on the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I would wear it. I don't want to mislead people into thinking that I'm not choosy though about my jumpers.
That's true.
You might get that impression watching the videos, the podcast. That's part of the choice. No, but
it speaks more to the selection at the Shropshire shop.
Yeah, that's a
tongue twister right there. I pulled that off. It's more of a testament to that selection versus your own threshold of quality.
REISS.
Yeah.
How would you say that shop?
I'd say Reese.
Oh, okay. I've been saying rice. German would put I.
Really?
Well, EI as the I sound. In England and America, I think we probably would actually go E. So
yeah.
I don't know where they're from, but they have an extra small range, which I got very excited about the other day. So more shops
if
do
you
seem
have
to be
things from Reese that you don't want, certainly send them our way. We'll link in the show description to our favorite stores. How do you think climate change affects reinsurance?
Ooh, good question. Check out our episode on... Did we do a climate change dedicated, or was it ESG in general?
We did ESG in general.
Okay. Check out our future episode dedicated entirely to climate change.
Insert, we'll put the text box over our face.
But it's a great question. I think we're still figuring it out. Is a big part of the answer. A few of my ex-colleagues and actually friends from more specifically the climate industry have recently started moving into reinsurance climate change related roles, which is really exciting. So I'm getting a bit of information by osmosis through them about how, on one hand, it's a product innovation challenge. So clients are dealing with transition risks and environmental liability risks and all sorts of new challenges to the way they used to do business. I mean, we're going at the moment through a gas and fuel crisis as a result of Ukraine-Russia, which is accelerating, to some extent, people's investment in other forms of energy. All sorts of new risks are being thrown up there. Then there's projects going on around the world to try and clean up oceans and to try and create new forms of energy or use new forms of energy in transport, etc. So all that stuff's happening on the ground, and meanwhile, disaster frequency, climate change itself, weather impacts are being felt in the form of more frequent floods, storms, wildfires, everything you can imagine being thrown at us. 40 degrees in the UK the other day.
Yeah.
40 UK degrees centigrade.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things that I think will be almost impossible to measure. If we just use the simple example of like huge heat waves across Europe, which isn't built for it, trains and infrastructure begin to not work just during those couple days. But the knock-on economic effect, that whether it's cancellation and ticket refunds and a slow accumulation risk that begins to emerge, ignoring increased severity and frequency of catastrophes and things, there's just so much little impact that continues to happen that sort of will be additive. I think we can think about many of those major categories as like these are risks there, but I think climate change, especially on the global risk basis, is going to have a profound impact on, and one that I don't think we'll be able to solve for. I think it'll sort of be embedded in a lot of the places as well as addressed more head on.
Let me find us an expert, and we'll do an episode, especially on climate change.
Certainly do that. How is Supercede funded, and what factors impact how you get funding?
Good question. So initially, in the very, very early days, when Jared and I didn't know very much about investors, I guess in general, we relied on very generous and visionary individuals in our industry who knew what we wanted to try and do and thought it was a great idea and wanted to back us. So they became angel investors, especially for us, really, to go and help our journey in creating, at the time, the sort of MVP version that was Riskbook. And then as that snowballed, we had the excitement of being able to actually then go to the much bigger venture capitalist players like Seed Camp, who've funded the first big check into companies like Revolut and TransferWise, and then you really get onto a conveyor belt to some extent of much larger independent software and tech venture firms that are looking for the next big thing that's going to change an industry, enable new business models, etc. So for us, it's been really kind of quite a traditional journey in some senses.
Yeah, I definitely think that it's the earliest days were probably the most difficult there, because the firms who really understood us were the ones that we sort of had forever said we were not going to take their money, right? We weren't going to take money from the strategic venture arms of most of the big insurers or reinsurers, because we always knew, going back to the Aon GC question, that we thought it was important that we remain independent. But so you take those firms away, we're more than happy to be like, this is what you guys are doing is super exciting. And we kind of went, thanks, and I would love to have your money. Don't get me wrong, but we can't have it. And so that first part of the journey was more difficult. Once we got momentum and got moving, and we've made more and more progress,
and we explained what reinsurance was,
and everyone knew we know as our reinsurance experts as well. Listen to the podcast if you want to invest in reinsurance companies. Then it became much more of here's how we're growing and this is what we're doing, and then it's more that traditional model. So that independence will always be critical to us. There's more and more firms that are opening up to us, and we have a lot of conversations with what our future investment might look like. But it's we've moved more into the big traditional venture capital firms than the smaller angel investors, and away from any sort of industry venture arms. Have you seen any unethical practices or questionable behavior while working in reinsurance?
I think the Lloyd's Culture Report is probably the best summary of that. I think all of us have, been in workplaces, in other industries as well, where we've seen things like banter in particular. We've seen things, regrettable ways of talking to or about colleagues or similar. I don't want to say that reinsurance is especially bad within insurance and reinsurance. I don't think that would be a fair claim, because I think if anything, reinsurance is a much smaller circle and has a lot more of a familial feel in a way. Like, people tend to like to be really nice to each other in reinsurance because they see each other all the time and hang out a lot. But certainly, there's always a few bad apples that spoil the bunch in any industry. So fortunately, I think now a spotlight is really being shone on that. And people are being encouraged to raise these kind of issues as soon as they see them. There's actual opportunities to report them. There's training for people who don't understand, previously what inclusion looks like and doesn't look like, and so on. So certainly that's changing in the right direction, but there's still a lot of work to do.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of work to do. And I've seen a lot, nothing that I would categorize as like egregious, but certainly things that's just like, no one's gonna like feel profoundly like unsafe from this interaction, but it should have been better. Like, that person, like, come on, kind of, where we're at this point now.
I think especially because we do have quite a big legacy of drinking culture as well.
Yeah.
And the way that deals are done, that occasionally people's senses of humour don't match with a tone that we would think would be acceptable. And you get to like playground style levels of humour, and you're like,
Yeah, I think when you try to tackle this, you have to start with like, what can you control? And when we were in the industry, we could control very little to some degree, like besides filing a complaint to the head person of the HR head of the firm that we were at or similar. But you could control your own sort of behavior and actions there. The thing that I like a bit more now, and I've made this abundantly clear to all of our female colleagues, is the threshold that I have for that happening is 0. And if any of our colleagues are in the market and they feel that they've gotten harassed, like, that's something they bring to me, and I address that with the people who are at those firms who I can, like, it gets escalated very, very quickly. We've not had that happen yet, but it's abundantly clear to our team that if that, like, this isn't an environment where you should feel like you have to kind of deal with something if you don't feel safe. But because of our roles now, we can control what we can control now, which is protecting our team.
And making sure that our team protects others as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And you sort of embed that, like, so we can do our little piece. But I think the industry as a whole is making some progress there, even if it's just the banter is being calibrated better now, or even, we're still wrestling with other big, more systemic access issues perhaps. But I think a lot of those little things are happening. I think the work that Jonathan and the Under 35s are doing with sort of instilling better behaviors in that sort of next generation of the industry, I think is all working towards that looking a lot better in the next sort of decade. Last question. That was in capitalized, so this is a very important one.
That meant you were supposed to shout it. It was in capital letters.
Last question for this Q&A. This Q&A, which means there's another Q&A session happening in the future. Ooh. So watch this space. What drove you to start a podcast specifically about reinsurance? I'm a big fan of the podcast. I especially love the analogy battles.
Oh, that's very kind of them to say. This mysterious Gary from somewhere, Chicago.
So Gary from Chicago, as a quick aside, Meta had this sort of all hands about like how the conditions are changing rapidly, and TikTok's taking their lunch. They have no real vision to catching up with TikTok, and it's this whole doom and gloom all hands. Q&A starts. Gary from Chicago, are we still getting like Meta days, which are like extra days off? To which Mark Zuckerberg looks and he's like, I can assume you could tell from the tone of this conversation, but meta days are canceled. And then all these tweets are like, R.I.P. Gary.
Oh,
poor Gary from Chicago. He had a good time whilst at Meta.
indeed.
So what drove you to start a podcast specifically about reinsurance? I'm a big fan, especially love analogy battles.
So we have to give massive credit to Cordy, who's our person behind the scenes, for conceptualizing that we could even do a podcast and convincing us that that was a pragmatic and feasible thing for us to do. So hats off to him for that. I think when we talked about doing a podcast and discovered that there was no anything reinsurance related in the whole world of podcasting, we got super excited and we were like, oh, we're going to own that space then, because we love talking about reinsurance. There's loads of people out there who love talking about reinsurance, and we're going to bring them all together and have some amazing conversations about reinsurance, and it will be a happy little space for everybody's earbuds.
Well, I think there's such an interesting, like, the reinsurance people, like, when they go out and they talk work stuff, there's all, like, it's such an interesting niche of the world. And when you find people and you meet people who are kind of in a similar space, it's
but nuanced.
Analogy on the fly. But it's similar to, like, you meet a stranger at, like, work, and they're like, oh, I grew up in this city. And you're like, what part of that city? And you're like, well, this area. It's like, what part of that area? Like, well, on that street. It's like, I was on the, like, and it's the, I think when you meet people in reinsurance, it's similar. It's like, oh, but what firm, and like what team, and like what are you? And then you have, it's like this immediate bond.
Mm.
And I think what we've tried to set out to do is kind of recreate a little bit of that on this sort of weekly basis. That's sort of a welcome to your safe space, reinsurance.
Well, it can be quite lonely, in the market, even in Lloyd's, which is unique among, well, fairly few places I can think of that are comparable, in the sense that you can walk down the street and see lots of other insurance people around. But spotting the reinsurance people even then can be quite hard. It's like 1 in 10 maybe at best who's from a reinsurance world. The rest are doing boring old insurance. We like pretending.
We just lost a listener.
No. Well, reinsurance is cooler. Sorry.
Yeah,
that's why it's the reinsurance podcast.
If insurance was as cool, there would be the insurance podcast, but come on.
They're shouting back into their headphones now. Reinsurance is just a part of insurance. The best part.
We're the niche. We're the category.
Well,
but that was sort of it. And I think we didn't really have huge, like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have this sort of massive vision to doing, and we're not doing like sponsorship or anything. This is something we're just doing for fun.
I mean, unless you want to pay us money for doing this, then why not? Or send us stuff.
You can
sponsored by the sweet new Rice clothing range, now available in extra small.
Yeah, exactly. If you want us to plug your swag, we'll send you an address.
What's that you're eating, Jared? It's the new McSomething burger, made entirely. I'm excited for this.
Oh, we're gonna spin this right out.
Yeah, send your proposals to Cordy, and he will be in touch.
But we found that we really enjoy doing them, and it gives us further justification for, like, keeping up with the news and chatting about stuff. And we've always wanted this to, because of that sort of familial kind of sense of this nature, this is very off the cuff, and we wanted this to kind of feel like all those conversations we've always had in the industry, or you have with new colleagues and things, is an extension of that. So continue to send us things you like and suggestions and things, but we have a lot of fun doing it, so I hope people have a lot of fun listening to it.
And we learn a lot as well. And we get to ask, because we claim, like, standard line, there's a lot of people listening to this podcast who might not know what that is, that word you just said. So could you explain? I also didn't know what you know.
I read this moments ago.
So it's great for us in many ways to be able to bring on guests who are experts in their field, and to really talk about the ins and outs of a given line of business or an approach to doing analytics or whatever it might be. I don't want to spoil any upcoming episodes, but we've got some really exciting guests in the pipeline who are going to be talking about all those kind of bits of the industry that you wish you understood better and had all sorts of questions for. So we'll do our best to ask them the exciting things on your minds.
Yeah. So keep feeding the Q&A, because that also sends us things and guest ideas and stuff like this. So thank you everyone for listening, and we're super excited to speak to you next time.
Looking forward to it.